What would happen if a savage alien race invaded the Earth and started brutally killing everything in sight? Would there be a hopeless war for humanity's survival? Would there be entire nations being destroyed, forcing humanity to leave behind their petty differences and band together to fight as one? Or would the invasion be so cataclysmic that the human race would go extinct within just days after the aliens first appeared? Apparently, none of that. In fact, much of the world would pretty much go on as normal for centuries. Sounds a bit far-fetched? Well, that's exactly what happens in 2016's The Great Wall. Hey guys, what is up? This is Ray here with GFC Talks, and in today's video we will be taking a look at the Tao Tei, the bizarre alien invaders from the movie The Great Wall. Now, before we begin, I just want to clarify that this isn't a negative review and that I actually enjoyed the movie as a whole, and I think it's definitely worth a watch. The creature design, the animation, the visual effects, they're all really well done, and the aliens themselves look and act in a very believable way, at least as far as their original mythology is concerned. And yes, the Tao Tei are rooted in the real-world mythology of ancient China, where they're depicted as one of the four evil creatures of the world, with the Tao Tei themselves representing greed and gluttony. This is mirrored by the aliens in the movie, who multiply based on how much food the Tao Tei queen consumes. The more food she eats, the bigger the horde gets, and the bigger the horde gets, the more food is consumed, resulting in a vicious cycle of exponential growth. Now, if the Tao Tei were only feeding on cattle and other animals, this wouldn't be as big of a problem, as the place they initially landed on Earth is a barren desert with little wildlife for them to hunt. However, humans are also part of the menu for the Tao Tei, and humans having a tendency to live in large, densely populated settlements means the Tao Tei have the perfect prey to feed on and grow their presence on Earth. The Tao Tei are ferocious beasts. They are highly agile and strong enough to lift a fully grown human in their jaws and flail them about like a little chewing toy. They have keen senses and high level of cunning, being able to set traps that can even take an experienced human general by surprise. Add to this the fact that the Tao Tei have the ability to communicate over long distances via some form of hive mind telepathy, and the aliens start to seem like a pretty serious threat to life on Earth. Yet, despite all these advantages that the Tao Tei seemingly have over the local biosphere, they somehow still manage to fail their invasion of the Earth in such an epic way that it can easily be considered the worst alien invasion ever to have occurred anywhere. Sure, they're not your typical sci-fi aliens that have advanced technology and want to take over our resources, but they definitely are an invasive species, and they seem to be well aware of this fact, given their hostile attitude towards, well, everything. They may just be a predator species from outer space, but they are seemingly driven by this instinctive need to expand their territory and grow their horde. Which means they need to not only gather food, but also outmaneuver their competition, which in Earth's case are the humans. And considering the fact that the humans themselves did not have the advantage of modern technology, and with the Tao Tei's ability to communicate effectively over long distances nearly instantly, the aliens should have been able to take over the whole planet over the course of just a few years after they landed. But they've been on the Earth for 2,000 years. Yes, 2,000 years before the events of the movie, and not only have they been unable to take over the planet yet, they've even been contained in the same place they crash-landed on Earth all those years ago. And all this happened when the humans had no organized defense of any kind against these creatures. In fact, the black powder that the Chinese developed that other nations wanted to get their hands on was invented after the Tao Tei came to Earth as a defensive measure against the aliens. Given this rather obvious weak state of their enemy, the Tao Tei could have launched an all-out assault on humanity right after they landed on Earth and could have easily decimated the local population, and then from there they could have steadily expanded outward and slowly taken over the entire planet. But they didn't. So what held them back all this time? Well, the movie doesn't really explain their history very well, but it does give us some clues as to what could have prevented either side from achieving a full victory over the other. As strategist Wong explains to William, the Tao Tei came to Earth in the form of a meteor that struck a mountain and turned it green, which the locals then took as a sign of the god's anger towards the emperor's greed. This belief would have initially discouraged humans from going near the mountain out of fear driven by their own superstition. This would give the Tao Tei enough time to carve out a territory for themselves. Over time, people would of course venture into the region to investigate, but the mountain turning green would perhaps be some form of radiation that would kill anything that got too close except the Tao Tei themselves, which would further strengthen the people's misunderstanding and fears surrounding the mountain and its new residents. Eventually, however, the Tao Tei would commence their attack, prompting the defensive actions of the humans. The building of the Great Wall, the invention of the black powder, the formation of the Nameless Order, and so on. However, as I've mentioned previously, none of these things existed before the aliens first attacked. So how exactly did the humans survive, let alone manage to build the wall and keep the aliens contained to one spot? Well, the truth is the Tao Tei themselves took care of that, as after every successful attack, once they had gathered enough food for their queen, they would go into some sort of a hibernation period that lasted well up to 60 years. This would ultimately prove to be their fatal flaw, as this gave the humans roughly 2 generations worth of prep time, which they used to better prepare themselves for every subsequent attack, getting better and better at containing the alien menace. So much so that they had effectively built their own version of Area 51, as the world outside was completely oblivious to the Tao Tei's existence for as long as they remained on the Earth, all while the humans were able to make detailed studies of the creatures, even gaining an understanding of their social hierarchy and how they communicated. And after 2,000 years of struggling to breach the Great Wall and enter the mainland, the aliens' most clever tactic turned out to be so ridiculous that it completely shatters any notion of their intelligence that the movie tried to establish in the first half. What was this grand master plan? They dug a tunnel underneath the Great Wall. A freaking tunnel! But not even like deep underground where they could simply move undetected, which given their telepathic abilities they could easily manage. No. Instead, they dug just slightly below ground level, so close to the base of the wall where those pesky humans managed to find it right after the Queen crossed over, and were immediately able to give chase on their prototype hot air balloons. Finally, once they reached the capital, the Queen, the central figure of the invasion, the commander-in-chief from whom all other Tao Tei received their instructions, chooses to position herself in the middle of the vast open palace grounds, with only her 30-odd royal guards for protection, while she begins to eat, leaving her exposed to attacks from above. And for all of her supposed understanding of the hostile environment she's in, she doesn't even bother to hide her presence at this point. Although being surrounded by thousands of drones along with your elite guards close to you, I guess the overconfidence is somewhat to be expected. After all, you managed to breach the enemy's home base after over 2,000 years of trial and error, and now there doesn't seem to be much resistance left. Of course, in the end, the whole white savior stereotype comes into play, and William manages to land the killing blow just in time before they can be completely overwhelmed. But still, I think it's safe to say that the Tao Tei were definitely not as much of an extinction-level threat as their movie made them out to be. In fact, despite their vicious nature and apparent cunning, they proved to be little more than wild animals that could easily be dealt with once their weakness is exposed. In fact, if they had landed on Earth in the 21st century, I'm sure we'd have them as special exhibits in zoos within no time. That is, if we simply didn't off their entire population first by simply dissecting their queen for study. That's gonna do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and leave a comment below and let me know what you'd like me to cover next, and I'll see you in the next one.